You think disappearing is weakness. It's the only move that exposes who was feeding on you. Your absence becomes punishment, while their loyalty collapses into withdrawal. You've been trained to believe your presence is proof of character, always available, always responsive, always mature, always the bigger man. That training wasn't designed to make you respected, it was designed to make you usable. Because the moment your presence becomes predictable, it becomes property, and property gets handled without care. So let's cut the illusion clean. Disappearing isn't avoidance. Disappearing is sovereignty. It's the Machiavellian act of reclaiming the only currency that ever mattered, access. Most men think power is loud. It isn't. Power is control of supply. In war, you don't win by shouting. You win by cutting food, routes, reinforcements. You win by making the enemy feel emptiness where certainty used to be. Your availability is their supply line. And if they've been living off you, your attention, your time, your emotional labor, then your disappearance is not silence. It's pressure. You want to know why disappearing works so fast? Because it bypasses debate. It bypasses morality. It bypasses negotiation. It hits the nervous system. Words can be argued with. Absence cannot. When you keep showing up, even after disrespect, even after being taken for granted, you teach a brutal lesson. You can treat me however you want and the benefits stay. That's not loyalty. That's surrender with a nicer name. Disappearing reverses the equation. It forces the other side into uncertainty. It forces them to sit with a new question they hate. Can I still reach him? And that question is where power begins, because people don't value what they have. They value what they might lose. That's human nature, not romance, not spirituality, not communication, hierarchy. The man who is always accessible becomes background noise. The man who can vanish becomes a problem to solve. Now understand the difference between childish ghosting and strategic disappearance. Childish ghosting is emotional. It's a tantrum disguised as silence. It's meant to hurt because you can't control yourself. Strategic disappearance is cold. It's disciplined. It's the withdrawal of access because a boundary was crossed or because your presence was being treated like a free resource. One is weakness. The other is control. And the reason most men can't do it is simple. They're addicted to being needed. They confuse being needed with being valued, so they stay, they reply, they chase closure, they demand explanations, they clear things up. They write paragraphs trying to repair their place. All of that is submission. A Machiavellian mind doesn't chase respect, it prices it. If the price isn't paid through behavior, through consistency, through standards, access is removed, not as revenge, as structure. This is why disappearing causes emotional suffering in others, because it forces them to confront the loss of control. They may not even miss you as a person. They miss what you provided: certainty, attention, validation, a target, a safety net. Your presence made their life easier. Your disappearance makes it unstable. And instability is fear. Fear is recalculation. That's what you're doing. You're not punishing. You're forcing a recalculation of your rank. You're showing them, I am not a public utility. I am not free. I am not always available. I can remove myself without warning, and my life still continues. That message is dominance without violence. But here's the warning embedded inside Chapter 1. Disappearing only works if it's consistent with your identity. If you vanish and then come back too fast, you look emotional. If you vanish and return with explanations, you look weak. If you vanish to get attention, you look needy. The power is not in vanishing. The power is in being able to vanish and not care what it produces. That's sovereignty. So Chapter 1 installs the foundation. Access is currency, and withdrawal is leverage. Everything that follows, every emotion they suffer, comes from this one fact. They thought you were guaranteed. And you just proved you're not. They don't miss you the way you think. They miss the control you gave them by being consistent, reachable, and emotionally available on demand. Your presence wasn't just you. It was a system that made them feel safe, superior, entertained, or powered up. And like every system, it creates dependency. Here's the mechanism. Your attention becomes a drug when it's easy to access and hard to replace. Not because you're magical, because you became a reliable supply line. In war, you don't defeat an army by arguing with it. You starve it. You cut roots. You remove the fuel. Suddenly, the enemy's confidence collapses, not from emotion, but from logistics. Your presence is logistics. You were the predictable text back, the predictable forgiveness, the predictable listening ear, the predictable rescue, the predictable audience. That predictability trains the other person's brain to expect you like a daily ration. And once expectation is installed, removal doesn't feel like distance. It feels like threat, because withdrawal exposes a brutal truth. They were leaning on you to regulate their world. Now, the most dangerous version of this isn't constant attention. It's intermittent attention, the same reason gambling ruins men. If your presence was sometimes warm, sometimes cold, sometimes rewarding, sometimes unavailable, you created a loop more addictive than consistency. That's not romance. That's a casino. They never knew what version of you they'd get, so they kept pulling the lever. But if you were the one always consistent while they were inconsistent, then you were the stable supply. You became the foundation they stood on while they acted superior. Either way, your presence became something they relied on, not respected. That's why your disappearance triggers specific psychological reactions, mechanical reactions. One, the loss of leverage. When you're reachable, they can manage you with small inputs, a message, a look, a "we'll talk later," a bit of guilt, a hint of affection. When you disappear, their tools stop working. Their leverage dies first. And when leverage dies, anxiety begins. Not because they love you, because they can't move you. Two, the collapse of narrative control. As long as you're present, they can keep you trapped inside their story. You're overthinking. You're dramatic. You need me. You'll be back. Your disappearance destroys that script. It creates a silence they can't edit in real time. Now they don't know what you're thinking, who you're with, what you're planning. And uncertainty is a threat in hierarchy games. A controllable man is safe. An unreadable man is dangerous. Three, the status shock. Your presence often functions as a status mirror. When you give someone attention, you validate them socially and psychologically. When you remove it, you remove their reflected importance. Suddenly, they feel smaller. That's why they try to pull you back fast, not gently, urgently. Because it's not about affection, it's about restoring their rank. Your absence signals, you are not entitled to me. And entitlement hates being exposed. 4. The recalculation phase. Once the initial shock hits, the Machiavellian moment begins. Recalculation. They start running silent math. Did I misjudge him? How far did I push? Can I still access him if I switch tactics? Will others notice I lost control? This is where they either attempt bait, provocation to force a reaction, attempt sweetness, sudden warmth to reopen the door, attempt smear, damage your reputation so your disappearance looks like weakness, or attempt replacement, publicly moving on to prove they weren't dependent. All of it is strategy, even when it looks emotional, because your disappearance did one thing: it changed the power equation without asking permission. So understand the core mechanism clearly. Your presence becomes their drug when it feeds their control, ego, routine, and status. When you remove it, they don't just feel lonely, they feel deprived of command. That deprivation is what creates the suffering. And if you stay cold, it forces the only outcome that matters: a shift in how they treat you or permanent separation. When you disappear, you don't hurt everyone. You expose everyone, because different people react to absence for different reasons. Some miss you, some miss the benefits, some miss the control, some miss the stage you gave them. Your job is not to guess. Your job is to categorize. A Machiavellian strategist doesn't read words. He reads patterns under pressure. Absence is pressure, and pressure reveals archetypes like heat reveals fingerprints. Here's who breaks first, and how. 1. The parasite, resource extractor. This one doesn't love you. This one consumes you. They relied on your attention, favors, money, emotional labor, protection, or consistency. Your disappearance doesn't feel like heartbreak to them. It feels like the lights going out. They'll test quickly. Hey, are you okay? Concern as a crowbar. Wow, so you're ignoring me now. Guilt as a leash. I guess you've changed. Shame as a hook. A parasite's suffering is not sadness. It's hunger. And when hunger rises, their true face appears. Entitlement, anger, accusations. They reveal themselves because they can't maintain the mask without supply. What to watch? They don't ask what they did. They ask why you're doing this to them. That tells you everything. 2. The controller, possession mindset. This archetype treats people like territory. They don't want you happy. They want you reachable. They want the right to check, to summon, to interrogate, to manage your emotional temperature. Your disappearance triggers panic because it removes surveillance. They escalate through control tools, repeated calls, "Where are you?" Indirect messages through others' threats of consequences, sudden emergencies. Controllers don't fear losing you. They fear losing command. Your silence makes them feel powerless, and they will do almost anything to restore the sensation of dominance. What to watch? They move from sweetness to aggression fast. That speed is the giveaway. It was never affection. It was ownership. 3. The opportunist, status climber. This one was around because you were useful socially. Your presence gave them image, access, protection, credibility, connections. You were a shield or a ladder. When you vanish, they feel exposed, but they won't admit dependency. They'll perform independence. So their reaction is usually public. They post more, they get louder, they attach themselves to someone else fast. They make it look like they moved on. That's not strength. That's damage control. Opportunists suffer in silence because their real fear is social. What will others think if I lost him? What to watch? They try to replace you publicly, even if privately they bait you. Two-faced behavior is their baseline. 4. The insecure admirer, validation leech. This archetype feeds on your attention like oxygen. They don't necessarily want to control you. They want to be confirmed by you. They need your texts, your likes, your compliments, your responsiveness to feel real. When you disappear, they spiral into self-doubt, obsession, rumination, sudden emotional outbursts. But even here, the Machiavellian point stands. Need is not love. Need is dependence. What to watch? They oscillate between "I miss you" and "you're cruel." That swing is withdrawal behavior. 5. The silent rival, competitive undercurrent. This one pretends to be neutral, but their ego competes with you. They used your presence as a reference point, something to compare against. Your disappearance removes their ability to measure themselves. So they suffer differently. They feel irritated, restless, and provoked. They may try to re-enter your space just to confirm they still matter. This archetype will often bait you with subtle disrespect or casual mentions. "Haven't seen you busy. Guess you're too good for us now." It's not concern. It's a rank challenge. What to watch? They want a reaction, not reconnection. Reaction proves they still have access to your emotional system. 6. The genuine ally, rare. Yes, this exists. Rarely. A genuine ally doesn't panic. They don't guilt. They don't punish. They check once cleanly with respect, and then they wait. No drama, no bait, no smear. And here's the difference. When you return, they don't demand payment. They don't interrogate. They don't punish you for having boundaries. They respect your sovereignty. What to watch? They keep dignity intact, yours and theirs. Now here's the ruthless value of Chapter 3. Your disappearance is a sorting blade. It separates people who valued you from people who used you. Most men fear disappearing because they fear losing people. Good. Let them fear it. That fear proves they've been over-attached to the wrong audience. A Machiavellian man doesn't chase connection at the price of sovereignty. He selects. and the reactions you get after you vanish. That's not chaos. That's the truth rising to the surface. Your disappearance doesn't create emotion. It reveals the architecture underneath. Because humans don't fear silence for romantic reasons. They fear it for survival reasons. In every hierarchy that ever existed, a person who vanishes becomes a variable nobody can control. And uncontrolled variables are dangerous. That's why the vanishing man triggers panic, gossip, and retaliation. Not because he's cruel, because he's unreadable. In primitive groups, being ignored meant death. Exile meant starvation. Not knowing where someone stood meant you couldn't predict alliances. You couldn't predict attacks. You couldn't predict protection. So the tribe learned one rule: uncertainty is threat. Your disappearance is uncertainty weaponized. And here's the part men don't understand. When you vanish, you don't just remove yourself. You remove the story people were using to manage you. You were the reliable one, the patient one, the guy who always comes back, the man who forgives. Those labels were cages, comfortable cages, but still cages. When you disappear, those labels collapse. Now they have no script for you. And without a script, they can't keep you in your assigned rank. That's where the threat deepens. Your absence forces the room to renegotiate hierarchy. So what happens next is predictable, because human nature is predictable. The counterattacks begin smear campaign when they can't reach you. They'll try to control how others perceive you. They'll frame your disappearance as weakness, instability, cowardice, arrogance. Anything that makes them look like the rational one and you look like the problem. Because if they can't control your body, they'll try to control your reputation. This is ancient warfare. Kings didn't only defeat enemies with swords. They defeated them with stories, calling them traitors, cowards, madmen, so the crowd would support their removal. Your absence invites the same tactic, narrative warfare. Baiting and provocation, they'll send messages designed to pierce your composure. Guess you were never real. Funny how you disappear when things get serious. I knew you couldn't handle it. These aren't statements. They're hooks, they're barbed wire. The goal is not conversation. The goal is to force you to react, because reaction proves you're still connected, still accessible, still governable. A Machiavellian strategist understands this. If they can make you speak, they can make you bleed. Replacement theater, some will immediately replace you loudly. New friends, new partners, new alliances, not because they moved on, but because they need to prove they weren't dependent. It's a public performance designed to erase the humiliation of losing access to you. But replacement is often a bluff. It's a flag planted on empty land. Ambush through third parties. When direct access fails, they'll send intermediaries. Everyone's worried about you. Just talk to them. Don't be like that. This is the soft version of a trap, social pressure disguised as concern. The crowd becomes the leash. They want you back in position, not because they love you, but because your disappearance disrupts the group's comfort. A man who can vanish reminds everyone that roles are optional, and that terrifies role players. Why disappearing feels wrong to you because you were trained to equate availability with virtue. But in power terms, availability is not virtue, it's pricing. If you're available to those who disrespect, manipulate, or use you, you're teaching them a law. My boundaries are cosmetic. And once people learn your boundaries are cosmetic, they will keep pushing until you either submit fully or explode. Disappearance prevents both outcomes. It denies them the slow conquest. It's a reset, a scorched earth maneuver. But here's the deeper threat. Disappearing changes how you are remembered. When you're always present, people remember you as stable, safe, manageable. When you vanish, you become a question mark. And question marks grow in people's minds. They obsess over what they can't finalize. That's why your absence haunts them. Not because you're special, because you broke the pattern. So understand Chapter 4's psychological installation. Your disappearance triggers ancient survival alarms. It forces hierarchy renegotiation. It invites counterattacks, smears, bait, replacements, intermediaries. And it exposes who needed you predictable to keep you small. This is why you disappear with discipline, not emotion. Because the moment you vanish, you are stepping into warfare. Quiet warfare, but warfare. And in warfare, the man who hesitates gets dragged back onto the battlefield on someone else's terms. Disappearing is not running, it's repositioning. But only if you do it with discipline. Otherwise, you become exactly what your enemies want you to be: emotional, unstable, and easy to frame. So here is the Machiavellian Disappearance Protocol, built for control, not drama. The goal is not to hurt them. The goal is to break entitlement and force a recalculation of your rank. Rule 1. No announcement, never declare your disappearance. No, I'm done. No, don't contact me. No farewell speech. Announcements are negotiations in disguise. They give the other person time to counter, guilt, bait, or smear before you're gone. A commander doesn't announce the withdrawal route. He disappears and lets the battlefield wonder. Your silence is the first dominance signal. You don't need permission to leave. Rule 2. No explanation. Explanations are currency. They hand your enemy a map of your emotional system. When you explain, you reveal. What hurts you, what you fear, what you still hope, for what you're willing to tolerate, that information becomes ammunition. They'll repackage your explanation as a narrative weapon. He's insecure. He can't handle accountability. He's manipulative. Silence starves their narrative. It leaves them guessing. Guessing is weakness. So if you vanish, vanish like this. Clean cut. Rule 3. Remove access, not dignity. This is where amateurs fail. They disappear, then stalk, subtweet, spy, or send one last message. That's not disappearance. That's obsession wearing camouflage. Machiavellian disappearance is the removal of access with your dignity intact. No begging, no checking their pages, no indirect signals, no accidental run-ins. If you keep orbiting, you're still available, and availability is what they were feeding on. Rule 4. Freeze the supply lines. You must identify what you were supplying and stop supplying it. Common supply lines. Instant replies, emotional reassurance, money / favors / help, being their therapist, being their audience, being their backup plan when you vanish. You're not just leaving. You're cutting fuel. That's why their emotions spike. Withdrawal always spikes when the supply stops. Rule 5. Expect counterattacks. Do not react. The first wave after you vanish is predictable. Bait. Insults designed to hook you, sweetness. Sudden warmth to reopen the door, emergency. A crisis to force contact, smear. Controlling the room's narrative. Your rule is simple. No reaction. Reaction is oxygen. Reaction proves they can still move you. Silence is dominance because it denies them the feedback they need to adjust tactics. If you must respond for logistical reasons, you respond like a bureaucrat, not a lover. Short, neutral, no emotion, no extra words. Example tone, not available. Won't be doing that. Handled, nothing else. Rule 6. The time window. Do not return too soon. Disappearing works because it creates psychological pressure through uncertainty. If you return too soon, you teach them the opposite lesson. He'll always come back. That turns your disappearance into a tantrum, not a strategy. So the protocol demands a time window long enough to reset expectation. Not because you're playing games, because you're destroying entitlement. You are breaking the addiction loop. Your presence is not guaranteed. Rule 7. Selective re-entry. If you return different. This is the part most men don't have the stomach for. You cannot return as the same accessible version of yourself. If you re-enter, you do it with reduced availability, higher standards, fewer explanations, tighter boundaries, real consequences. You don't re-enter to fix things. You re-enter to test alignment. Your return is not a reunion. It's an evaluation, because the purpose of disappearing is not distance. It's selection. You vanish to see who respects you without access. And if they don't, you don't negotiate. You don't resent. You just keep walking. So the disappearance protocol is the opposite of emotional avoidance. It's disciplined control, no announcement, no explanation, cut supply, ignore counterattacks, return only with new standards, or don't return at all. That's how you disappear like a sovereign, not like a boy. If you disappear and still feel guilty, you're not sovereign. You're conditioned. Conditioned men don't get respected, they get managed. And the easiest man to manage is the man who believes his availability proves his worth. That identity has to die, not slowly, not gently, executed. Because the accessible you is the version of you that predators can predict, pressure, and pull back into position. The accessible you has a doctrine, even if you never said it out loud. If I'm reasonable, they'll be fair. If I explain, they'll understand. If I stay, they'll appreciate it. If I'm loyal, they'll return loyalty. That doctrine is a fairy tale told to men who want peace more than power. In reality, loyalty without standards is a trap. Reasonableness without consequences is an invitation. Presence without scarcity is cheap. So Chapter 6 is the identity execution. You stop being the man who is good and start being the man who is selective. Step 1. Kill the approval reflex. The accessible you is addicted to one thing, being seen as fair. That addiction makes you easy to control through shame. They don't have to beat you, they just have to imply you're cold, selfish, immature, dramatic. And you rush back to prove you're not. That rush is submission. A Machiavellian mind understands. Shame is a leash. When you feel it, someone is already holding your chain. So you replace the approval reflex with a new reflex. When disrespected, withdraw, not argue, not explain. Withdraw. Step 2. Replace loyalty with selection. The accessible you stays because of history. I've known them forever. We've been through a lot. They didn't mean it. That's emotional debt, used against you. Selection doesn't care about history. Selection cares about behavior. If someone violates your standards, the relationship doesn't get talked through. It gets downgraded or ended. Clean, that's not cruelty. That's self-governance. Step 3, build a constitution. Your non-negotiables. Most men have boundaries like fog, present, but you can walk through them. A sovereign has boundaries like steel. So you install laws, not feelings. Laws. Disrespect triggers distance. Manipulation triggers silence. Repeated violation triggers permanent removal. Anyone who needs me smaller loses access. The key, laws are enforced automatically. You don't decide each time. Because if you decide each time, they'll pressure your decision. Automatic enforcement makes you ungovernable. Step 4. Scarcity becomes your default. The accessible you is always reachable. That's why people feel entitled to you. Entitlement is born from repetition. If they can text and you reply instantly every time, they don't think of it as a privilege. They think of it as a right. So the new identity makes scarcity default. You respond when you choose, not when they demand. You attend when it benefits you, not when it pleases them. You help when it's earned, not when it's requested with guilt. Scarcity is not a trick. It's a signal. My life is governed. And governed life produces respect. Step 5. Emotional detachment without coldness. Theater. The accessible you is emotionally fused. Their moods move you. Their silence shakes you. Their approval feeds you. That fusion is slavery. Detachment means their behavior becomes data, not destiny. You observe, evaluate, act. No theatrics. No alpha performance. Just calm separation. You stop needing closure. You stop needing final words. You stop needing the last message. Because needing the last message is still needing them. Step 6. The replacement identity. The vanishing man. This is the new identity. A man who can be present without being owned. A man who can leave without being shaken. A man whose attention is earned, not assumed. When you become that man, disappearing isn't a tactic anymore. It's simply what happens when standards are violated. And that's the real point. Disappearing is not about them suffering. It's about you becoming the type of man who cannot be taken for granted. Because once the accessible you is dead, the world changes its posture around you. Not because you demanded respect, because you made disrespect expensive through scarcity, selection, and consequences. Here's the final warning: disappearance is a blade. Used correctly, it cuts entitlement and restores rank. Used wrong, it cuts you, your credibility, your reputation, your position. Most men try to disappear while still craving approval. That's not strategy. That's panic dressed as power. And the world can smell panic. So let's make it explicit. There are two kinds of disappearing. One is Machiavellian sovereignty. The other is cowardice. Cowardice isn't fear. Cowardice is avoiding consequences while still wanting the benefits. It's vanishing to escape accountability, then returning to collect attention like nothing happened. That pattern destroys you, because it teaches everyone the same rule. He runs when pressure comes. And once that label sticks, contempt returns stronger than before, because now the disrespect has justification. Now people feel safe degrading you. You proved you won't hold ground. So you need to understand what disappear wrong looks like. The coward's disappearance, what not to do. You vanish after being exposed, then come back with excuses. You vanish to provoke chasing, checking constantly if they miss you. You vanish, but still orbit, watching, stalking, subtweeting, sending indirect signals. You vanish, then rage return, exploding, demanding answers, seeking closure. You vanish with no standards, then re-enter as the same accessible version. All of these are the same disease, neediness with extra steps, and neediness is what contempt feeds on. Now, the Machiavellian form is different. The sovereign's disappearance, the only one that works. A sovereign disappears because of structure, not emotion. A line was crossed. A standard was violated. Entitlement appeared. Manipulation became obvious. Then access is removed. No speeches, no drama, no begging, no one last message. And here's the real marker. He does not monitor the reaction. He doesn't disappear to be chased. He disappears because he already decided the behavior disqualifies access. That's selection. Selection is what separates a sovereign from a performer, because performers need applause. Sovereigns need alignment. The counterattack phase, when you disappear correctly, expect the counterattack phase to arrive like clockwork. They will try 3 angles: bait, provocation to force a reply; sweetness, warmth to reopen the door; smear, controlling the room's story if they can't control you. This is why Machiavellian disappearance is not just silence. It's discipline under provocation, because one emotional reply ruins the entire weapon. It tells them, he's still connected. Silence is not passive. Silence is denial of access, and denial of access is dominance. The elite standard. You must be willing to lose them. This is the line most men won't cross. They want to disappear, but they want guarantees. They want to be missed, but not lost. They want power, but they want comfort. That's fantasy. The only disappearance that changes your rank is the disappearance you're willing to make permanent. Because only then does your absence carry real threat. A bluff is smelled. A real exit is respected. So here is the Machiavellian conclusion. If they valued you, they will adjust behavior. If they used you, they will punish you through guilt, rage, or smear. Either outcome is victory, because either outcome reveals truth. Truth is the strategist's advantage. If you understand this and you're ready to operate like a sovereign, not like a man who needs permission, then prove it. Not with words, with standards. Disappear from one place you're being exploited. Remove access from one person who feels entitled to you. Cut one supply line you've been feeding out of guilt. And if you can't do that, don't pretend you're practicing Machiavellian power. You're just consuming content for comfort. If you're serious, write one word in the comments: vanish. Not as a motivational slogan, as a declaration of discipline. Because in the end, the world doesn't respect the man who is always there. It respects the man who can leave and not return.